الأعزاء، محاضرتنا اليوم neuroanatomy the vertebrobasilar arterial system. يبدأ هذا السيستم بالvertebral artery. The vertebral artery originates from the subclavian artery first part. It passes into the transverse foramen or foramen transversarium of the upper 6 cervical vertebrae. At the skull base, it is intimately related to the C1 vertebrae, اللي هي الأطلس, and passes through the atlanto-occipital membrane. هذا الممبرين هو موجود بين ال C1 وبين الفورامين magnum, perforates the dura and arachnoid to reach the subarachnoid space. It winds around the medulla, both left and right. Vertebral arteries يجون يمنى يسرى. Vertebral arteries from lateral to medial. The right and left vertebral arteries unite in front at the level of bones to form the basilar artery. The basilar artery passes superiorly in the pontine groove, and at the end it will bifurcate into left and right posterior cerebral arteries. Territory supplied by the vertebral artery: we have spinal branches, which supplies spinal cord, meninges around the cord, bodies and periosteum of the vertebrae. We have muscular branches, which supplies deep neck muscles. We have cranial branches, we have a meningeal branch to the falx cerebelli, anterior and posterior spinal arteries and spinal cord, posterior inferior cerebellar artery, هذا اللي يسموه البيكا. It is part of the cerebellum, but it supplies the posterior part of the cerebellum. Choroidal plexus of the fourth ventricle, central nuclei of the cerebellum, inferior vermis, and posterolateral aspect of the medulla. Territory supplied by the basilar artery: we have the labyrinthine artery, which supplies the internal ear. We have the pontine branches, which supplies the pons. We have the anterior inferior cerebellar artery. We have the anterolateral inferior surface of the cerebellum, infratentorial aspect of pons. We have the superior cerebellar artery, which supplies the superior surface of the cerebellum. It also supplies the pons, the pineal gland, and the superior medullary velum. Posterior cerebral artery: it curves laterally and backward around the midbrain and is joined by the posterior communicating branch of the internal carotid artery. هذا يرجع لي ورا، داير مداير البرين laterally، يرجع لي ورا حتى يتلقى البوستيريور communicating artery اللي جاي من الانترنال carotid artery حتى يكون السيركل اوف ويلس. هذا هو ال vertebral artery. زين، هذا هو الvertebral artery اللي يمر بالفورامين ترانسفيرساريوم. هنا يجي من البوستيريور الى الانتيريور اسبكت مال الميدولا الليفت والرايت، يتحدن وين؟ يتحدن بالبونز. بداية البونز يسوون البيزلر ارتري، والبيزلر ارتري نهاية البونز يسوي البوستيريور cerebral artery اللي يجي منه؟ يجي البوستيريور communicating artery. Now we have the posterior cerebral artery. It is a terminal branch of the basilar artery at the anterior superior aspect of pons. At its origin, it is joined by the posterior communicating artery to form the circle of Willis. Upon reaching the lateral aspect of pons, it winds around the cerebral peduncles towards the tentorial part of the cerebrum. Its branches supply the occipital and temporal lobes. يعني هذا يجي صار بنهاية البونز، صار left to right posterior cerebral، تلقى شي يسوي؟ يلوف داير مداير الميد برين، يطلع النوبة posteriorly ويتلقى posterior communicating artery حتى يسوي circle of Willis. It has هنا posterior cerebral artery cortical branches, central branches and choroidal branches. Cortical branches من اسمها cortex supplies the inferolateral and medial surfaces of the temporal lobe and the lateral and medial surfaces of the occipital lobe. Central branches, it pierces the brain substance and supply parts of the thalamus and the lentiform nucleus as well as the midbrain, the pineal and the medial geniculate bodies. Choroidal plexus supplies the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Territory supplied by the posterior cerebral artery, عندنا branch وعندنا territory. Posteromedial branches, we have the globus pallidus, third ventricle, thalamus. Posterior choroidal artery, the lateral geniculate body, lateral ventricle, posterior thalamus, choroid plexus, and the third ventricle. Posterolateral central branches, we have the medial geniculate body, the posterior thalamus, the cerebral peduncles, and colliculi. We have the temporal branches. They supply the occipitotemporal gyri, lateral, medial, and parahippocampal, and it also supply the ancus. لا تتذكروا ancus بالمحاضرة السابقة. Occipital branches. We have the posterolateral aspect of the occipital lobe, lingual gyrus, cuneus. We have the parieto-occipital branch, which supplies the precuneus and cuneus. شكرا جزيلا. هذه من posterior cerebral artery brain supply parts: midbrain, thalamus, posterior limb of internal capsule, optic tract, choroid plexus and cerebral peduncle, splenium, corpus callosum, third the posterior of the central hemisphere, inferior medial temporal lobe, large part of the occipital lobe. تقريبا إذا تريدون تشوفوها هنا يمكن أحسن الصورة، اللي هي هاي تقريبا نفسها بالمحاضرة السابقة، اللي هو هذه هي الاريا اللي بالأصفر اللي هي السبلاي مالت posterior cerebral artery. يمكن أحسن من هاي تشوفوها. شكرا جزيلا.